Welcome to the next lecture on microwaves. Today we will start something called microwave tubes, linear beam tubes, and so this will be now a little bit different from what we have done till now, especially the waveguide analysis. The discussions now onwards will be about these issues. So one of them is we the amplification of microwave signals. Okay, this is very important operation. See, waveguides are used at several places, especially if you see the base stations, radars. It is used from microwave source to some point where we want to later on maybe we will need to amplify it at the end of at the receiving end. So one part we have done. Okay, we have done waveguides, how to transmit the microwave at particular frequencies through a guided medium. Okay, now we will need several operations. So one of the important operations is the amplification of microwave signals. So you know that conventional ways of amplification of medium range frequency signals we use. If you go back to post or pre transistor era, then we had vacuum tubes, right? And post 1948 especially, we have transistors. So we will right now concentrate on vacuum tubes. Vacuum tubes had, like we have transistors, diodes, and so on and so forth. So we had in vacuum tubes something called triodes and tetrodes and pentodes. We will not definitely go through it. It is obsolete now to study these things. One question which may come to your mind is why we are doing tubes. So the topic today is our microwave linear beam tubes. You definitely might have heard we also have microwave solid state devices. One reason is, see, at low frequency, triodes, tetrodes, all the vacuum tube devices, they are completely obsolete. They have been replaced by transistors and its variants. Okay, so you have now MOSFET, you have FinFET, okay, and you have even Schottky effect based devices available, and now very recently high electron mobility transistors. Okay, they have completely replaced these vacuum tubes, but at microwave range, at very high frequency, very high frequency, at microwave frequencies, if you have low power applications, their solid state devices work fine. Okay, so you again have this. So even at low power, high frequency, very high frequency, these vacuum tubes are replaced. But one area, one you can say paradigm wherein microwave tubes are still prevalent is very high frequency and high power. Solid state devices cannot handle that level of high power, which is needed in various applications of microwave. So you will see in radars, tubes are still prevalent, and similarly, some cases of satellite communication, wherein we want to beam up very high frequency and very high power, microwave signal. So hence, studying microwave linear beam tubes, they are still relevant. That's why it is still in the curriculum. It is still in the books, and even the research is still going on in this area. Okay. Now you might have, I hope some of you at least know it very well, but I think in the course of basic electronics also, especially when we study the oscillators and op amps, we study the effect of frequency on the operation of transistor. And there also we study that at high frequencies there are a lot of second order effects, lot of capacitance effects which come into play. That is the reason we don't use this tubes, conventional tubes, that vacuum tubes, for the purpose of amplification of microwave signals. So we will not go into detail of that, but I will just draw a triode equivalent circuit by which we can get some idea why we will not continue with conventional vacuum tubes in microwave, why we need something different, something non-conventional which can handle high frequency signal. So on the left hand side is the usual vacuum tube triode based circuit. So you can think of this as a transistor. So, okay, in BTech, I think in 90s, vacuum tubes used to be in the curriculum, but definitely when they became irrelevant, it was removed. So this is one of the classical circuit here. Let's concentrate on only one thing. What is its equivalent circuit? So this is the triode circuit. This is its equivalent circuit. And in this equivalent circuit, you can see that it has some capacitance effects here. The triode has these two plates, and there is a vacuum in between, which will form, or a free space which will form a dielectric, and it has equivalent capacitances at low frequencies. Okay, what will happen is, suppose if you take this capacitance at low frequencies, and given the fact that, which I will write here, we will not go into the deep discussions of vacuum tubes. From the vacuum tube analysis, the capacitance CGP, that is this capacitance, is much less than CGK. Okay, this capacitance is much less than CGK. So what is the corresponding impedances? 1 over omega C, right? So when CGP is less, it means the impedance here will be very high and the impedance here will be very low. Okay, so what will happen is, at low frequencies, these two capacitances will have this effect, that since CGP is very low here, suppose CGP, and CGK is high, so at low frequencies this impedance is very high. It means this impedance, when it is very high, it will be blocked, and this impedance will be low. This corresponds to this capacitance, so hence it will be short of a short circuit. So what will happen at high frequencies? That the impedances become zero as omega increases. Okay, so both of the points will become short circuit points, and the amplification, the process of amplification will fail at high frequency. I'm giving you a brief idea about it, although one can do a detailed analysis of the circuit, but we just need an intuition here why we will not go for conventional vacuum tubes. Another problem with usual vacuum tubes at higher frequency is that of transit angle. So how is it defined? First of all, in vacuum tubes you have this anode and cathode. Okay, so there will be one anode and cathode, and there is a grid, just like you have emitter, collector, and base. So if this anode and cathode, the distance between the two is d, and the velocity, definitely velocity of electron, if that is v naught, so the d over v naught, this much time, this is called a transit time. Okay, this is called a transit time, and there is a angle called transit angle theta g, which is defined as omega tau g. Okay, where this tau g is this transit time, so we will write as omega d over v naught. So what happens is, at low frequency, this transit angle and hence transit time, so transit time is also now depends upon frequency. So at lower frequencies, this angle is negligible. Okay, because you see this velocity is very high. It's 3 × 10⁸ meter per second, and this distance is small. So overall, at low frequencies, so even if it is some 100 megahertz, so the ratio is small. But as the frequency increases, omega increases to 1 gigahertz, and so on and so forth, beyond the 1 gigahertz, which is when we enter into the microwave range, this transit angle will increase, and the overall effect of increase in transit angle is that the electron oscillate back and forth, okay, between anode and cathode. The reason is because the frequency, the transit angle, which defines the oscillations of electrons, those oscillations may be quite huge. For example, the potential between cathode and this anode, it may alternate even 100 times more than what it should be during this electron transit time. The moral of story here is that reduce the operating frequency. If you want to overcome this effect, reduce the operating frequency. So hence we can't use, for this reason also, vacuum tubes for at microwave frequencies. The third reason, which I will just state qualitative, that is related to gain bandwidth product. Gain bandwidth product. So in usual vacuum tube based devices, the gain bandwidth product is independent of frequency, but we want the gain bandwidth product to increase with frequency, which is not possible with usual usual vacuum tube circuits. Hence again we need some different devices, different tubes for microwave devices, for microwave circuits, so that the gain bandwidth product, we can increase it with frequency. Now, I will first of all show you the table of various devices, various you can say tubes which are used at microwave frequency. Here are different types of linear beam tubes. We call them O type. I have discussed this O type when we had one offline class. I will again tell you why we call such devices O type. Anyway, so there are several types. First of all, broadly there are two types: cavity type and slow wave structure type. Then cavity type is of again two types: resonant and forward wave. Resonant is the famous one, that is called a klystron. We will mostly spend our time with klystron. This klystron is not so famous, not so useful also. Then slow wave structure, we have helix TWT. They are both of type resonant as well as something called forward wave, and coupled wave, traveling wave tube, TWT. Backward wave is these two, BWA, BWO. Again, not much relevant. So this is very, very important, klystron, and this is heavily used. TWT is also used. We will see, if time permits, we may do TWT, but I will spend most time in klystron. This is a very widely used, it is a cavity actually. So it is used for amplification purpose. So it is used as microwave amplifier. There are two fundamental principles which are used in klystron for amplification. One is that is called principle of velocity modulation and current modulation. These are the two fundamental principles by which we can understand this operation. First of all, let me give a brief introduction to cavity, because we will use this term again and again, especially cavity resonator. So in simple words, it is a metallic enclosure, you can say a closed surface that confines the electromagnetic energy, and the corresponding electric and magnetic energies inside the cavity will determine its equivalent inductance as well as capacitance. So it has equivalent inductance and capacitance, and you know that they will be decided, inductance is decided based on the magnetic field, and capacitance is decided based on the electric field energy inside the cavity. And definitely some energy will be dissipated because of its finite conductivity. Okay, so that and the energy dissipated will determine its equivalent resistance. So equivalent resistance will be determined by energy dissipated. So it can equivalently be denoted as RLC resonator. Now you know that what resonator circuit is. If you have a simple, suppose RLC resonator circuit, you know it operates at a particular frequency and particular modes depending upon the value of LRC. Okay, in fact, a lossless you know LC or RC, these also you might have studied. So you can think of cavity resonators, their microwave equivalent. Okay, so they are not a circuit, it will be a cavity. Okay, it will be an empty cavity, but its dimensions and the way we we incident the electromagnetic wave inside it, and then the dimensions are made according to the in different modes of EM waves, as in waveguides. Let's take a very simple example of, suppose, rectangular cavity resonator. One difference right now between this cavity resonator and waveguide is we take now this dimension, the third dimension, also into account. So A is its length, B is its height, D will be its width. Okay, and if we talk of how what will be the electromagnetic and or electric field and magnetic field component, how they will vary inside this. So we can again talk of TE mode and TM mode. Suppose you consider TE mode, so that means your EZ component is 0. So here the HZ component will be, it will basically resonate. So all the three via all the three dimensions, there will be sinusoidal variation. So it will be some constant, then cos of m pi x by a, cos of n pi y by b, and sine of some p pi z by d. Okay, so we'll call it TE M and P mode. So as against waveguides, there are only M and N, two integers, because that was traveling through the waveguide, that was used to get transmitted, and it was getting attenuated also. So you can think of waveguide as equivalent to transmission line in low frequencies, and this cavity resonator as an RLC resonator circuit, okay, which stores the electromagnetic energy in this form. Similarly, if you have TM mode, I recall that TM mode means there is no component of magnetic field along the direction of propagation. So Hz is equal to 0. So Ez will be E naught Z, where this M, N and P, so M and N can take value 1, 2, so on and so forth, and P can also take 0, 1, 2, so on and so forth. And also that wave number will be given by, so K square is equal to, so you recall it was M pi by A square plus N pi by B square. For waveguides, it will be now P pi by D square. And corresponding to the resonant frequency, instead of cutoff frequency, we call it now resonant frequency, will be 1 over 2 under root of mu epsilon under root of M by A square plus N by B square plus P by D square. So both for TE as well as TM. And one more thing, if the dimensions are such that A is greater than B and B is less than D, then the dominant mode, that is the lowest frequency, will be for 101 mode. Okay, so M is equal to 1, N is equal to 0, and P is equal to 1, which will be Fr is equal to 1 over 2 under root mu epsilon under root of 1 over A square plus 1 over D square. So this will be the dominant mode if dimensions satisfy this thing. So this derivation is exactly same, the derivation of these equations will be exactly same as in the waveguides. You can solve the Maxwell equations for this resonator and you will get these equations easily. And how do we store electromagnetic energy? So there are two ways. So one is this is your resonator, and you insert a straight wire probe at a position here. Okay, this is the input now, and then correspondingly you will have, if it is suppose P mode like this, will be electric field, or if it is TM mode, this will be the magnetic field. Or there another possibility is you can have this probe here. Unfortunately, we can't have the labs. Otherwise, in labs you have a resonator there, cavity resonators. Okay, so here we excite this resonator. And as with usual RLC circuits, if the frequency of the input electromagnetic wave is equal to the resonant frequency, that is FR, then you know what will happen. There will be maximum amplitude of the EM waves stored inside. Similarly, you can have circular, cavity resonators. We will not go into discussion of circular cavity resonators. They are technically they have the same properties, but definitely they have different equations, different waveform equations, different cutoff frequencies, but methodology is same. Now, how does this klystron look like, and why these cavities are important? We'll see it now. So we will study something called two cavity klystron amplifier. Let me draw it first, or even I can include the figure from the book instead of drawing it here. You see the reason for calling it two cavities. This is the cavity klystron amplifier. So it has two cavities. One is called the buncher cavity, the other is called the catcher cavity. Okay, and here is the source. We have here cathode and anode. So this is the source of electrons, right? And there are some, like we have batteries for biasing. So there are some batteries here, Vg and V0, and these distances are very important. So the dimensions L and L plus D and these timings, they are very important. We will try to understand how it works. Let's have first qualitative understanding what will happen. You see, when electrons leave this cathode, they travel at a uniform velocity, okay, at a uniform velocity V0. Now when they reach this portion of the buncher cavity, then the gap voltage, we call this gap voltage, the voltage which will be the potential which will be here, that will be having, because of the resonant cavity here, that will be having positive half cycle, then 0 and negative half cycle. Okay, so during, definitely when the gap voltage will be 0, then there will be no change in the velocity of electrons. They will pass through this cavity as it is. But when the gap voltage will be positive, then the electrons will accelerate, the velocity will increase. And when the gap voltage will be negative, the velocity of electrons will decrease. And as a result, what will happen is, once electrons leave this buncher cavity, they will form, the reason that is called buncher is because they will form a bunch of electrons. You see, you are having some electrons which are moving fast, some which are at constant velocity, some which are at lower velocity. So earlier all electrons were moving with equal velocity, right, before passing through this buncher cavity. Now because of this cavity, there will be the potential difference which will change with time because of the resonant frequencies inside the cavity. So what will happen is, after this buncher cavity, you will see this bunch of electrons, rather than, the bunch will be, the fast moving electrons will be bunched together, slow moving electrons will be bunched together. So several bunches will be formed after passing through this cavity. And this space where the bunch is formed, they are called drift space. And here is one important term which is called velocity modulation. That is the variation of electron velocity in drift space. That is called velocity modulation. Now, what is the work of second catcher cavity? So we will do the analysis in detail and derive even the various required equations in next class. So right now the catcher cavity, again, it is a resonant cavity that will be operating in such a way, it will decelerate the electrons. Now what will happen? So the kinetic energy will be decreased. That kinetic energy will be converted into potential energy, hence the oscillation, the amplitude of oscillation will increase. Velocity will decrease, but amplitude of oscillation will increase. Hence, this will amplify the signal and which will be collected at the collector. So this is the brief qualitative work of this klystron. To get more insights, we need to do some analysis. We will derive some equations of transit time, and also then there will be a particular angle that's called a gap transit angle, and then we will derive the average velocity of microwave voltage, sorry, not velocity, microwave voltage at in the puncture gap, how to find that, and finally we will get some equations about gain also. Okay, so definitely we will do a two-stage process. One is the velocity modulation process, and then there will be bunching process. Okay, and finally we will try to get some quantitative analysis of how the gain, how much is the gain also of this amplifier. It is a very it has been used heavily in high power applications. I will show you one photograph of one particular klystron. This is one particular klystron. It has been used in one satellite communication purpose, for one satellite communication purpose. So these are the, no, definitely, yeah, they have used it here circular cavities. So these are the cavities and anode, cathode, and other things. So you can see the size also. So the power, this klystron works for 400 kilowatt power. You can't imagine a solid state device or amplifier working at such a high power. So that is the reason that despite their bulky in the size, they can't be integrated, there can't be VLSI designed for it, but they are still used in very high power applications like radar, space communication, and so on and so forth. And in next class, now we will do the rigorous analysis of klystron, especially its velocity modulation process and bunching process, and we will try to get a equation for the gain. Thank you.